Good afternoon, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. The US and European Union avoid a trade war with a 15% tariff deal. Delegations from Thailand and Cambodia meet in Malaysia for peace talks. And at least 3 people killed and several seriously injured after a train derailed in southern Germany. The United States and the European Union have struck a trade deal to avoid crippling tariffs. President Donald Trump and the President of the European Commission announced the agreement on Sunday, which will see EU goods taxed at 15%. Nick Harper has more from Washington.
It's taken 4 months of intense negotiations, but going into this weekend there was a renewed sense of optimism that the US and the EU was close to achieving a deal. Donald Trump is in Scotland on a 4-day golfing and business trip, and on Sunday Ursula von der Leyen, the EU chief, visited him at one of his Scottish golf courses. Before their closed-door meeting, both leaders said there was a 50-50 chance of achieving a deal, but just over an hour later they came out to announce what they said was the largest trade deal ever achieved. Trade between the 27-member bloc and the United States last year totaled almost $2 trillion. Donald Trump achieved a 15% tariff rate for European goods entering the United States. He had threatened 30% if a deal was not done by his August 1st deadline. So it is a better rate than threatened, but it's certainly not the 0% rate that the Europeans were pushing for. There are some exceptions as well. Pharmaceuticals are not included in this deal. Neither is European steel and aluminium. Steel and aluminium will remain at a 50% rate. The EU also agreed to buy US military equipment, to buy $750 billion worth of US energy, and to make $600 billion of investments in the United States. Ursula von der Leyen said it had achieved a stability and predictability that was needed in the trading relationship between the two countries. But when asked what concessions the US had made, she dodged the question, instead saying that this had achieved rebalance when before there was imbalance. That August 1st deadline is fast approaching, with countries around the world looking to try and do deals with the United States. Donald Trump on Sunday said he's looking at deals with 3 or 4 other countries. Those could come in the coming days. Nick Harper for A News in Washington, D.C.
It's time for This Day in Europe, where Anita Sharma brings us more details on the EU-US trade deal.
Hello and welcome to This Day in Europe. The US and EU finally strike a major new trade agreement at US President Donald Trump's Turnberry Golf Resort in Scotland. Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the deal ahead of the firm August 1st deadline set by Trump to avoid sweeping 30% tariffs, which would otherwise have triggered retaliatory responses and potentially disrupted 1/3 of global trade. The announcement caps months of intense negotiations and follows a similar framework struck recently with Japan and the UK. Key elements of the deal include a 15% flat tariff on most EU exports to the US, including cars, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. Certain strategic sectors, such as aircraft and parts, generic drugs, semiconductor tools, select chemicals, and agricultural products, will be tariff exempt on a 0-for-0 list. Steel and aluminum tariffs will remain at 50%, though. While Trump had indicated that would continue to apply as part of a, quote, worldwide thing that stays the way it is, von der Leyen said a quota system would be put in place. The EU is also promising 510 billion euros in new investments in the U.S. On the energy front, the bloc is purchasing about 640 billion euros in U.S. products, including LNG and nuclear fuel, to replace Russian oil and gas. There will also be significant acquisition of U.S. defense and tech equipment. Both leaders described this as a step toward bringing stability and predictability. Trump calls this the biggest deal ever made and believes it will bring both sides closer together. He also emphasizes that EU member states will not impose tariffs at their end. As for von der Leyen, she calls this a good deal, emphasizing that the outcome would preserve business continuity for firms on both sides of the Atlantic. She acknowledges the talks were tough and negotiations difficult, and that the 15% tariff rate for most exports will provide much-needed clarity for European businesses. Now, if a deal had not been reached by this Friday, the EU had up its sleeve 93 billion euros in retaliatory duties. But this deal ends, for now, a high-stakes standoff that could have unsettled global markets. The 15% across-the-board tariff is less punitive than the originally threatened 30%, but it will still impact European exporters. In Europe, judgment may be mixed, since some were counting on getting that broader zero-for-zero model. The key takeaway could be stability over idealism, in a striking reminder of what's at play when commercial interests, geopolitics, and looming deadlines collide. For now, though, diplomacy and high-level Gulf in Scotland proved a surprisingly effective backdrop for concluding one of the most consequential trade deals of the year. Stay tuned to A News for the latest on how the U.S. and EU move from framework to enforcement, and watch how global markets and policymakers respond in the days ahead. For now, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Top US and Chinese officials will resume talks in Stockholm today to try to tackle long-standing economic disputes at the center of a trade war between the world's top two economies. The talks intend to build on earlier agreements made in Geneva and London, which temporarily capped reciprocal tariffs at roughly 30 to 55% on US imports and around 10% on Chinese goods. If no deal is reached by the 12th of August, tariffs could surge back to triple-digit levels, disrupting global supply chains. Our reporter Laura Westbrook has more on the trade talks in China.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's leading the U.S. delegation, has set a pretty low baseline expectation that the two sides would likely extend their trade truce, which currently expires on August 12th, for reportedly another 90 days. It's his third meeting with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, who is leading the Chinese delegation. And these talks are also expected to lay the groundwork for a possible leaders' meeting between Presidents Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in October in South Korea. Now, since the last round of talks, Beijing has boosted shipments of rare earth magnets used to make everything from electric vehicles to high-tech weapons, while the US has relaxed restrictions on sales of less advanced semiconductors to China. These talks are supposed to be much more wide-ranging. Scott Bessent has said that Chinese purchases of oil from Russia and Iran could be on the table, but getting China to agree to cut its oil imports would likely be very disruptive for the Chinese economy. And Chinese state media has already pushed back against that idea. One state-run outlet reported that China won't play along with such attempts to use Beijing to hurt Russia's economy. And this comes against the backdrop of Chinese purchases of US crude oil, liquefied natural gas and coal reportedly dropping to zero last month. China has imposed 10 to 15% tariffs on US energy goods in retaliation to fentanyl-related tariffs. State-run outlet The Global Times reported that a key focus of this round of talks is to build on agreements reached in previous talks and to push for more tangible results. A top priority for Beijing is getting a reduction to the 20% fentanyl-related tariffs. China has made some efforts, adding 2 more chemicals that can be used to make fentanyl into the restricted list, a move that Donald Trump has praised. Laura Westbrook, A News, Hong Kong.
Yemen's Houthi forces are threatening to target ships belonging to companies that do business with Israeli ports, regardless of their nationalities. The Houthi military spokesperson warned companies to stop business or face attacks from Houthi missiles and drones. He urged countries to pressure Israel to end its siege on Gaza, promising the Houthis would stop attacks once the siege is lifted. Israel's military said it will open humanitarian corridors to allow aid convoys into the Gaza Strip after weeks of mounting international pressure and warnings of starvation. The military also announced it would pause operations each day for 10 hours in parts of Gaza.
Israel, under intense global scrutiny, has resumed airdrops of food supplies. Military footage released on Saturday shows aid boxes parachuting into northern Gaza with flour, sugar and canned goods provided by international agencies. After months of international pressure, aid trucks are finally on the move toward Gaza. Egyptian state media aired footage on Sunday showing convoys of humanitarian trucks departing from the Rafah border crossing. Dozens of vehicles carrying tons of aid are heading to the Karem Shalom crossing, one of the main access points into southern Gaza. Inside Gaza, humanitarian organizations warn the crisis is beyond urgent. The World Health Organization says starvation is now widespread across the territory, home to over 2 million people. Israel has announced on Sunday tactical pauses in military activity for humanitarian purposes from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., though many question how safe or effective these windows really are. Thousands of Israelis took to the streets of Tel Aviv on Saturday, voicing their strong opposition to the country's continued military operations in the Gaza Strip and calling for an early ceasefire agreement with Hamas.
We think that there is no point in continuing the war, and everything should be with a solution for both sides. So we just hope that someone will make sure that it happens as soon as possible.
With no end in sight to the conflict, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues, and despite fresh aid deliveries, the threat of widespread famine remains.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims there is no starvation in Gaza, despite global concern. His remarks come as Israel pledges to open new aid corridors and pause military operations for 10 hours a day. Netanyahu added that Israel will continue to fight until they've achieved complete victory over Hamas.
Israel is presented as though we are applying a campaign of starvation in Gaza. What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza. We enable humanitarian aid throughout the duration of the war to enter Gaza, otherwise there would be no Gazans. And what has interdicted the supply of humanitarian aid is one force, Hamas. Again, the reversal of truth. Hamas robs, steals this humanitarian aid, and then accuses Israel of not supplying it.
We are joined now by Rachel Avaram, CEO of the Dona Gracia Center for Diplomacy and the editor of the Economic Peace Center. Hello.
Hello. I just want to say that what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said about there being no starvation in Gaza is absolutely correct. And any starvation that presently exists, it's because of Hamas, because they attacked the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation that tried to supply aid, because they're actively interfering with the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It is not in Israel's interest that there will be a humanitarian disaster in Gaza. We want just one thing: the return of the hostages, and for the bombs that have been targeting Israel to stop. There's still fire rockets at us. We still have problems with Ben Gurion Airport with accessing flights because of the Houthis, because of Hamas rockets. We just need these two things: for Hamas to be overthrown because they're a terror organization that is responsible for the October 7th massacre, and for the hostages to be freed.
Okay,
we don't
so Rachel,
need this war to continue.
Thank you for that. Rachel, I was also just going to ask you, now that there's a 10-hour pause in regards to military action in parts of Gaza, how much difference do you think that will now make for humanitarian access and for the people in Gaza to receive that aid?
I think it makes a huge difference, because it will allow a window of opportunity for aid to get into Gaza to the people that need it. We just need to hope that Hamas doesn't do anything to steal the aid, because when you drop humanitarian aid from the sky, it's very easy for Hamas to steal it. And that's my concern.
Right, okay, and the next thing in regards to everything that's going on, these pauses in military action. It's only for 1 week. Do you think that this will be extended or widened to other parts of Gaza?
It depends on the military activity of Hamas and the ability to fight against Hamas. They can only open this in areas where there's no fighting. I really hope that Hamas drops their weapons and gives up power and releases the hostages so this whole thing can stop, so that the people of Gaza can begin the process of rebuilding, because both sides, both Israelis and Palestinians, have suffered immensely, and this war needs to stop. The hostages need to be freed, and Hamas needs to go.
Thank you, Rachel, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
The second UN Food Systems Summit stocktake is due to take place today in Addis Ababa. The 3-day event, co-hosted by Ethiopia and Italy, is meant to analyse and address the progress made towards building more resilient and sustainable food systems 4 years after the inaugural summit.
The UN Food Systems Summit opens in Addis Ababa on Monday for a 3-day session. Co-hosted by Ethiopia and Italy, the summit marks the second global review since the inaugural event in 2021. It will assess progress in transforming global food systems and accelerate collective efforts toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals.
In the current UNFSS, I think we should expect more action, and not just action, but collective action, because Africa, despite our fragmented nature, we have common problems in terms of climate change, in terms of food systems fragmentation, in terms of food and nutrition security. So we need to really rally around and advance collective action.
For this year, we expect to see a lot of transformations, information on transformative actions that has taken place in countries that are implementing this food system holistically. You know, the essence is to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs.
The summit aims to bring together governments, civil society, and the private sector to share ideas, forge partnerships, and mobilize resources to build more resilient and equitable food systems.
Tensions between Cambodia and Thailand have risen following recent border clashes that resulted in casualties and the displacement of civilians. Leaders from both countries have arrived in Kuala Lumpur, where mediation talks are taking place.
The US says it'll be attending the ceasefire talks in Malaysia on Monday between Thailand and Cambodia. It follows several days of deadly clashes between both nations over a disputed border. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, in his capacity as ASEAN chair, will host the talks in Kuala Lumpur between acting Thai Prime Minister Phumtham Wechayachai and Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet. Cambodia's government has confirmed that its Prime Minister Hun Manet will lead the delegation.
This special meeting was organised by Malaysia as a host country, with the support of the US, and with participation by China as well. The purpose of this meeting is to reach the immediate ceasefire between the armies of Cambodia and Thailand, following what the prime ministers from both countries had agreed upon with US President Donald Trump.
Peace talks come after Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim proposed a ceasefire last week. And US President Donald Trump, during his trip in Scotland at the weekend, said he told both countries that he would not conclude trade deals with them unless they ended their fighting.
And I spoke to both of the prime ministers, and I think by the time I got off, I think they want to settle now. Marco Rubio's working with him also, his people, and him. I think we're going to get that. That would be a great thing, but that would have turned out to be a bad one. And I will tell you, India and Pakistan, they were really getting ready to go at it. So getting those things settled, if I can do it, and if I can use trade to do that, it's my honor. But I had great talks with two very good people that they both really would like to make a deal. So we'll see what happens.
Citizens from both nations voiced strong support for a ceasefire and welcomed Trump's efforts to bring their leaders to the negotiating table.
I agreed with our leaders' call with Trump and US President Donald Trump's intervention in this ceasefire effort so that people can no longer live in fear and both sides can stop fighting immediately.
If there is a ceasefire, things will be better. It's great that America is insisting on the ceasefire because it would bring peace.
Both sides of the border express hope and relief at the prospect of a ceasefire, eager for peace and a return to normal life.
For me, I think it will be great if the Thai side agreed to stop fighting so both countries can live with peace.
I'm happy. Our brothers and sisters in Kantharalak district of Sisaket, or in Ubon Ratchathani, Buriram and Surin would all be pleased too, so that we can get back to our businesses and people can return to their homes from the shelters. That's good news.
More than 30 people have been killed and 130,000 more displaced in the worst fighting between the Southeast Asian neighbours in 13 years. As both sides prepare for negotiations, hopes grow that lasting peace will soon return to the border area.
In Sudan, more than 2 years of armed conflict have left large parts of the country without reliable electricity. Despite recent improvements in security, fuel shortages and damaged infrastructure mean daily blackouts continue for millions.
Although security has improved in central regions since late 2024, essential services like electricity, gas and water remain out of reach for millions in Sudan.
The war that the rebels started has caused big damage and destruction upon sectors including power generation, transmission and distribution.
In the capital, Khartoum, the country's largest oil refinery still lies dormant, attacked repeatedly during the fighting. With it offline, fuel shortages have worsened, further crippling electricity generation.
Power shortages have disrupted the water supply. We are forced to drink unpurified water from wells or rivers, which makes us sick. Although the battles have stopped, electricity supply has not been restored, and we continue to endure the hardships caused by blackouts. Displaced families cannot return home, and no work can be done under these conditions.
In Port Sudan, on the Red Sea, blackouts can last more than 10 hours a day. In Khartoum, some residents endure up to 16 hours without electricity. With no steady supply of power, candles have become one of the most sought-after items in Sudanese households. For now, life in the dark continues, while many hope the lights will come back on soon.
3 people have died and several seriously injured after a train derailed in southwestern Germany. The accident happened on a route near the French and Swiss borders, with emergency crews working through the night.
Around 100 people were on board this train when 2 of its 4 carriages left the tracks, killing 3 people and seriously wounding many others. The accident happened on Sunday early evening near the German border with France and Switzerland. It was travelling between the towns of Sigmaringen and Ulm, a route of roughly 90 kilometres.
At around 6:10 p.m, we received a report that a regional express train had derailed on the route between Sigmaringen and Ulm. It has been verified that this occurred between Riedlingen and Munderkingen. 2 carriages jumped the tracks and derailed. As things stand, there are 3 fatalities and several injuries.
The derailment prompted a large-scale emergency response, with 120 rescue workers initially called to the scene. The fire chief for the district described the wreckage as severely twisted.
The train is still exactly as the emergency services found it. A train with 4 carriages that left the track bed and was pushed together and pulled apart accordingly.
National rail operator Deutsche Bahn said its thoughts were with the victims and their loved ones. It said many people had been injured and that it was working closely with authorities to determine what caused the crash. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz posted on X to say he mourned the victims and offered his deepest sympathy to their families. The cause of the derailment remains under investigation.
Wildfires continue to rage in the Turkish northwestern Bursa province. Thousands of people have evacuated from several neighborhoods as air and ground crews battle the flames. High temperatures and winds have fueled the spread of fire. More than 1,700 people have been evacuated as a precaution. Around 1,000 firefighters are working on containing the blaze with air support. Google says it failed to warn more than 10 million people in Turkey about a deadly earthquake in 2023, which killed at least 55,000 people. The tech giant's researchers reported in the Science Journal that its earthquake alert system's warnings were delivered to only 469 people. More than 100,000 people were injured when the quake struck the region in the early hours in February 2 years ago. Google has since updated the detection algorithms, but stresses its alerts are meant to support, not replace, national systems. A senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader called the Zangezur Corridor project a cover for broader projects aiming to undermine Iran's national security. He said the objective of the corridor is to sever Iran's links with the Caucasus and impose a land blockade on Iran and Russia. He added that Iran had opposed such actions from the outset, even deploying forces to the borders and conducting deterrent exercises. Iran admits military drills to counter the Zangezur Corridor plan. And here to discuss this is Mohammad Mammadov, research fellow at the Top Chebashov Center. Mohammad, how are you?
Thanks for having me.
Great. My first question is, what do you make of the comments made by the advisor to the Iran supreme leader?
Well, it's not the first time Iranian advisors to the Iranian supreme leaders have been making these kinds of comments. After Second Karabakh War in 2020 and 2022, it was another advisor, Kemal Karazi, who actually dubbed the term, who called the Zangezur Corridor as NATO's Turan Corridor. So now in 2023, Velayati also shared his ideas about a corridor in a similar fashion, but at that time the emphasis was mostly about the growing Israeli presence along Iran's northern borders. And at the same time, Iran was talking about its concerns and red lines about changing maps of the South Caucasus. But now Velayati is openly saying this because of the shifting geopolitical realities of the region after the second 12-day war in June between Iran and Israel. I think two reasons are behind his comments. The first one is geoeconomic. Now Iran is increasingly isolated in the region in geoeconomic terms. Turkish-supported Iraq Development Road is opening Iraq to the Asia, Middle East, Europe corridor that will isolate Iranian ports and railroad network. And at the same time, Zangezur corridor will isolate Iran because the route, east-west route, will mostly run through Central Asia and the South Caucasus. And geopolitically, Iranian side believes that Turkey's growing successes in other geopolitical theaters like Syria, Libya, Iraq, and at the same time, recent normalization with PKK will translate its growing presence in the South Caucasus in terms of opening the Zangezur corridor. So they are calling it are linking it to NATO so that they can get support from Russia and China, who are also openly concerned about the NATO's expansion toward eastward.
Yes, so they see all of this as obviously a threat to where they're placed and they're positioned. But what do you think will happen if things don't go in their way? Could things escalate for them?
Previously, they had conducted a military exercise along Azerbaijani borders, which it openly admits now. And recently, we saw that Iranian and Russian navies in the Caspian Sea conducted joint drills that maybe, according to Velayati, could be a signaling that that shows the growing concerns on Iranian and Russian parts about the possible involvement of the American company, in the security-wise in the Zangezur corridor. So I think Iran's strategy here is strategic ambiguity. They applied this strategy toward the Gulf countries previously, started 2023, that on the one hand, they engage with these countries. We remember 2023 March agreement with Saudi Arabia. And on the other hand, they use their axis of resistance forces to threaten the sovereignty and territorial integrity of these, security of these countries. I think the same rationale is working against Azerbaijan and other countries who are invested in this corridor, because now Iran, on the one side, Pezeshkian comes to Baku, there is open diplomatic and economic engagement. We have this partnership on the intercontinental transport link North-South corridor. But on the other hand, through the people like Velayati and Karazi, the Iranian leadership is signaling that it will also it can also take some retaliatory steps to prevent the realization of the Zangezur corridor. So it's kind of a combination of diplomacy and the military threats, which we call strategic ambiguity, that Iran deploys or leverages against Azerbaijan to prevent any plans around the Zangezur corridor that are against its interests.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Mamdov there.
Thank you for having me.
Georgia has reported a sharp increase in shipments passing through its territory along the Middle Corridor. That's the route connecting China and Europe through Central Asia and the South Caucasus. According to the country's economic ministry, in the first 6 months of the year, nearly 10,000 shipping containers were transported along the corridor, which is more than a 170% increase compared to the same period last year. The Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway also saw a major boost, carrying more than 9,300 containers, up from 160 last year. Over in Georgia, a new generation of tea growers are trying to restore its once great tea industry. They're reviving plantations and looking to reinvent the country's tea legacy.
In the quiet hills of western Georgia, tea once defined daily life. In the 20th century, Georgia's Guria region was home to a once thriving tea industry that fueled millions of cups across the Soviet Union. At its core stood the Anna Suole Institute of Tea and Subtropical Crops, where scientists worked to perfect cultivation methods. Lika Megraladze grew up here. Her mother was one of those scientists. Today, Lika runs a guest house and cultivates her own patch of tea, preserving a family legacy on once forgotten ground.
It was only one whole Soviet Union researching institute for tea and then as a subtropical culture. And with huge laboratories, different laboratories. It was experimental fields for tea, for different plants. It was experimental tea factories and a lot of tea.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought production to a halt. With markets lost and the country in turmoil, Guria's tea fields were abandoned. By 2016, tea output had plummeted 99% from its height. Now, a generation is trying to revive what was lost. Entrepreneur Nika is among them, turning overgrown plantations into working fields once again. 10 years ago, he began rehabilitating derelict tea plantations, financed partly by a grant from the Georgian government.
We must be different from Chinese tea makers, Taiwan tea makers, because Georgia is Georgia, and we need some niche to make our own tea, because as I said, it collapsed 40 years. 40 years here was happening nothing. Here was jungles, and 10 years ago, this plantation, this area has new life. So we are also experimenting in our fields as well, and also in factory to make some new, like wild tea, forest tea.
This time, the focus is quality over quantity. Nika and his team want Georgian tea to stand out, not just return.
That's all we have for you now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.